Nick, thanks for coming on today. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Really looking forward to getting into this the topic that we're going to get into today. But before we do, why don't you just introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are, kind of what your story is.
All right. My name's Nick Zinani. I'm a coordinator of sports performance for football at Wake Forest University. Pretty much the number 3 in line here. So there's Coach Horgan, Coach Barry, and then there's me. And then, I'm a certified athletic trainer. I have a master's in athletic training. I've been working in collegiate football for the past 5 years. Before that, I worked in a bunch of different sports up in New York, where I got my degree. Prior to that, I had a 4-year enlistment in the military, and I kind of grew up bouncing all over the country. So it's a quick little bit about me there.
Quick rundown, yeah, absolutely. And I think you've got a pretty unique story, for lack of a better word. I think that's pretty true, kind of what it is. And I know obviously we've been like we don't work together necessarily, but your office is just down the hallway from mine. So we kind of shoot the shit, so to speak, in the hallway every now and again. And I think your journey, kind of what you've been doing, is fascinating. I think you've got a lot of great insights for people to know about. So why don't you just tell us initially, kind of, obviously you mentioned the military there. Why don't you just tell us initially kind of what made you get into the military, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I was a kid who bounced around a lot throughout my childhood. So like my old man was a prison guard in California, and we moved up and down along pretty much where the prisons were. And it was just me and my brothers, and pretty much we moved like multiple times every year. And then my parents split, and we moved to the East Coast. And as I was growing up in the East Coast, I didn't have a whole lot of guidance, and I got in a lot of trouble, and I didn't do all the things I probably should have done. I made a lot of mistakes that luckily I was able to go ahead and I don't know, not hold my whole life back. And so I ended up not graduating high school, getting a GED. I ended up somehow getting into college in Arizona, even though I shouldn't have, just so I could get some debt under my belt at the age of 18. And after about a semester of that, I dropped out and then bounced around California for about 6 months. And I had no job, no education, no home, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So I joined the Army. I don't know if it would be all you can be at that point still. I think we might have moved on to Army of One. I don't know what the slogan was, but I opened up a magazine one day and I saw something about Army Rangers, and I'm like, nah, I'm going to go try to do something like this. And I did. So.
And then, so like you're in the Army, obviously you've kind of obviously like seen a few things, and then we don't necessarily need to go into loads of detail about kind of what you were doing in the Army, but do you mind just talking a little bit about the type of training that you did to prepare you to maybe get into the Army and to start with, and then when you were there, kind of what did they put you through?
I think that, basic training is like when you get a freshman athlete in, right? And you put them through like really, and I mean, obviously the word basic is in the title, right? But you put them through really basic programming, right? And you put them through like really basic stuff. And while they're doing that stuff, they all complain and they think it's like the hardest thing they've ever done. And then, all of a sudden, like 2 years later, they're in lifts and, they're doing like their winter conditioning or their summer conditioning. And it's like 10,000 times harder than anything they ever did when they first showed up. I think that's a lot of what like the basic training is. And I think that that's how, I just showed up, like everybody else, I just showed up, and I grew up kind of like in and out of boxing gyms and stuff like that. So I wasn't like a slob or anything like that. I played every sport known to man, like in high school. And I mean, I couldn't stay on any teams because I didn't ever go to class. And so like, it's not like I was like super out of shape, but I don't think, looking back, I felt like when you first get in, it's like super easy. And then I went to airborne school. And that was super easy because all of a sudden you got like nights and weekends off. And then I ended up in the 82nd. And after the 82nd, after I got there, my unit was deployed at the time. So they all came back. And then I realized that I hadn't done anything hard yet, because then we started to actually PT. So it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday was always like a 5+ mile run, right? Always. And Thursday was always going to be somewhere between 5 and 10 miles road march, right? And, minimum 45-pound, rucksack on your back. And then in my platoon, we'd always like circle up and fight at the end. And it was awesome. But stuff got hard, but I mean, there's no like direction in terms of like training. I mean, the military is really moving towards like having like sort of like direction in how they actually train people, like a system.
Mm-hmm.
Or it was just like, hey, this dude who's been on 2 deployments and runs like a 6-minute mile, he's your squad leader and he's gonna go run you to death. And you were like, okay, let's go, and I always laugh because it's like when I was 18 and 19 years old, I'd go out there, I'd be smoking a cigarette in the morning, getting ready for like a 6-mile run, and like just downed like a cup of coffee, and I'd be like, oh shit, this is what we're gonna do. Like okay, like flick that, and be like, all right, fuck it, let's get it, and that's how you rolled. Like that was just like what we did. You'd be up until like 2 o'clock in the morning, and you just rinse and repeat, man, do it again, and yeah. So.
And I think one of the things you actually told me when we were chatting one day was you'd go on this kind of 5-10 mile run, whatever it is, and then you'd get back to base, and then you think, oh yeah, like fantastic, we're back.
Yeah.
You go and like relax or whatever, and then drill sergeant or whoever is just like, all right, another 5 miles, like keep running past the base.
Yeah. We called those wonder runs because you'd wonder when they were going to end, right? So it was just like, all right, we're going to go out on a run, and you'd be like, all right, like we're going to go run, and you go run like a few miles, and as you start to see the barracks, you're like, oh man, yeah, we're almost done, easy. And then you run right by the barracks and you run back into the woods and you're like, oh shit. And then you like do like a 1 or 2 mile loop and you come back around and there's the barracks again. You're like, oh, this time we're good. And then about like the second or third time, you're just like, all right, fuck it, I'm in for this. Like, and we're running until this runs over. And yeah.
So how do you attack that from a kind of mental point of view? Because there'd be a lot of guys there, I'd imagine, kind of young guys like out of high school and stuff, that they'd be like you said, oh, we're back to the barracks, I get to relax now. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, another 5 miles. And that constant cycle of just almost mentally just getting beaten down every time. How do you attack that?
I think everybody has this place, right, that they get to. And it's just like first of all, like I was lucky because I ended up in the 82nd. And I mean, there was a bunch of slaps in my division and in my unit. And, we even had, like a couple in my platoon here and there. And, and those people are who they are, you know what I mean? And it's like, I feel like I was lucky because I was honestly surrounded by like dudes who really embraced like a warrior's mentality, like in my immediate unit, like, right. Like the guys in my platoon, for real. Like we had a lot of Ranger qualified guys in my platoon. I ended up in a recon platoon later on, and you had to try out to be in my platoon. So like really when you get to when I was there in my scout platoon, like, right, like you had to try out to be there. So we didn't take you if you didn't already pass some sort of a gut check, right? And then we had something like 16 Ranger qualified dudes out of like 30 guys, less than 30 guys. I think there was 27 of us, which was like more than the rest of the brigade had almost all the way through it. And so like we kind of prided ourselves on like being those dudes who like, no matter what happened, it was like gut check. Like I hate running, Chris. I hate running. I hate running so much. I hate it more than anything else. I would and I used to joke about it, like, guys, I'd much rather die in a pile of brass than run a fucking mile in combat. Okay. And that's true. That's true about me, right? Like I would much rather just stop, stand, shoot, let's fight this out. Right. Like, and I mean, but like when it came to training, it's like, if this is what we're doing, then this is what we're doing. And I just think that I was really bought in, to what that was and who I wanted to be and my idea of what I was training for, like I was constantly thinking, like, cause I had some salty dog vets in my platoon, and they'd be like, oh shit, we made contact this and you hear about their war stories, and you being like the young dude, you're like, I want to be ready for that. I want to be ready for that. And that was kind of like our mentality. Mm-hmm. that's how we kind of attacked things. And I hated running.
So in terms of being like, you mentioned a few terms there. So you said like gut check, being ready for it. Did training prepare you for that, do you think? Or was that just more of it, was it not necessarily the training itself? Or was it just kind of your mindset being like, I can do anything? Or did the training shape you?
It's both, right? It's both. It's a combination, right? Because you have people who, it doesn't matter what you do, they quit on themselves. Like you can't do anything. You can only put a person, you can only bring a person so far, right? That person has to bring themselves to a point, right? And I'm a firm believer in that. Like I can't do anything for my athletes if they're not willing to do more than me, right? Like this is like coaching isn't a 50-50 split here. Like you have to go and play the game. You have to go practice. Like all I can do for you is X, Y, and Z. The rest of the alphabet is yours, brother. Like you got to handle that stuff because like if you don't, you're going to fail, you're going to fail. And in combat, failure means people die, and I think that like our mentality and my mentality in there was kind of like, I was lucky. I had a guy who, when I first came into my unit, Jamin Baggett, he pulled me under his wing. He's this Ranger qualified guy. He's got 2 combats under his belt. All he wants to do is be a Green Beret. He's like super motivated. And he was always like, no, fuck that, Zinani. You're better than that. You got to finish that. You got to do this. Like he was always on me, right? He's the only reason why I ended up in the scout platoon in the first place. And he was always telling me about how we could always do more. And he's like, push yourself. And it was in the back of my head. And it's kind of maybe a bit of like how I grew up, like always having to prove myself to people and stuff. I felt like, I don't know, I think that you can mentally help people get there, but at some point people have to get there themselves. And I think that that's a problem that we run into, not as just coaches, but as human beings, as mentors, as because we care about people, right? Like as a coach, you care about people and you want them to be successful. You want them to feel successful. You've had failures in your life and you've effed up and you've dropped the ball and you know what it's like to go through a shitty situation. And you as a human being with that, like that empathetic part of you, doesn't want other people to feel that. Right. And so like you try, like, like the best, hell is paved by the road with the best intentions, or whatever.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
It's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So it's like you intend to like help somebody and make it easier for them, right? But by making it easier, you've done them a disservice, right? And so it's like, I love boxing. The sport of boxing is my favorite sport in the world. And like me and the guys talk about this all the time. They're always like, man, why do you always see so many good boxers from the Ukraine and, from Kazakhstan or from the Philippines? And I'm like, hey man, you ever been to a third world country? You ever know what it's like to like not have everything and then have to go get it? It's like, I'm always motivated because my dad was a prison guard, right? Like, so as a little kid, I didn't have money. I didn't have stuff and I knew what it was like to not have anything on like Christmas and stuff like that. Like, I know how that feels. Right. And I don't want that like in my life ever again. So I'm hungry for my own success. Right. And like those people who grow up in those parts of the world and they're, they're boxers and they're fighters and like they go through these these horrible upbringings, right? Like Manny Pacquiao's dad like killed his dog and like tried to feed it to him or something like that is the story. And it's like what helped push him to like come to the United States. It's like, I don't know if that's accurate, but like, I've heard that, right? And so, I mean, Gennady Golovkin's brothers were all killed in like war in Kazakhstan. Like, it's like these people know what suffering like. They know what it's like to have nothing. They know what the bottom looks like, it feels like, and they don't want to be there. And sometimes hitting the bottom and experiencing that, right, is what it takes to know how that you have to like learn to dig deep and like fight because you don't want to be there. Like, I don't want to be at the bottom. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be. You're not gonna put me there, kind of thing. So I don't know.
And do you think then, keeping in mind that you've got to have kind of gone to this maybe horrible place in training before you get deployed, do you think, looking back now, because like my theory is, the way I think about it is, you're some of your own experiences. Okay, so the more experiences you get exposed to, you're kind of inoculated to these experiences. So if you're going to, so you said off camera, you were deployed to Afghanistan. So did your kind of experiences, being maybe at the bottom and pushed hard physically and mentally in your kind of training, did that prepare you when you were, for the kind of experiences that you were exposed to when you were in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things obviously you can only simulate and you can't experience until you experience. So like, like when you see like bodies and stuff like that, like that's something that you can't train for. Like, like you've kind of like mentally kind of wrapped your mind around it. And I think that when you're like the age of like most, like soldiers, when you're going into like combat, like you braced for that. And like you have this like really dark and like twisted sense of humor, and like you like make light of a lot of stuff that's like really messed up. And you're surrounded by this great support system. But the training wise, I'd say physically, I trained almost, I almost feel comfortable saying harder than we ever had to, go in Afghanistan. I also was the dude who got hurt and had to be carried 3.5 miles. So I can't speak for, my brothers in my platoon, like having to carry my ass for that distance. That seemed like it probably sucked a lot. But yeah, I think our training really kind of prepared us. And like and you talk through a lot of scenarios, and you go through a lot of scenarios, and I think that, like, as we talked on mental toughness, right, and like that was kind of like something we wanted to talk about, I thought, right? So it's like I think a great thing to understand is that mental toughness is partially real and partially bullshit, like because I know a lot of fighters, man, like who are super mentally tough and in training, man, like there's no like I used to like go work out at this place, Belmore Kickboxing, right? And I used to train with some people there, and there was this guy who used to come in and train. He's in the UFC now, Gregor Gillespie, right? And this guy, he used to run on the treadmill next to me at full incline, full speed for like 45 minutes straight, like to start his workouts, right? Like, and I was just like, this guy's a madman, like, and so like mentally he might be, like a UFC fighter or a boxer, like they might be this super tough guy who's like ready to go ahead and go toe to toe with like this other badass dude, and just fight it out. And I might eat a bunch of shots. I might get kicked in the face, and that's mentally tough, right? Right. But I might throw that same dude into the middle of a firefight, and he might shit all over himself because he has not thought or prepped or trained for that kind of scenario ever in his life. So he's not weak. He's just not trained. And so I don't know if mental toughness is as real of a thing as it is just being prepared for what you're going to experience, right? And once again, I think that true preparation for true experience means you got to take the coddling out, like, right? Like you can't, as a coach, you can't make things easier. You can't tell things that you can't paint a rosy picture and make things all, like happy go lucky, because that's not the reality. I mean, like, yes, there's some people in sports who never lost. Like they are, even Floyd Mayweather lost. Floyd Mayweather lost in the Olympics, and, everybody always talks about how he's undefeated. And you can argue that he got robbed, but he lost. And you could even make the argument that Olympic loss maybe fueled him to be able to dominate in the professional side of things the way he did. I don't know,
So you mentioned there, which is fascinating. You essentially said it's situation specific, this mental toughness. So let's fast forward through your career a little bit. Now you're working here at Wake Forest University with the football staff. How does that kind of translate then to football. So we, like, coaches love to talk about being mentally tough. It's like their favorite go-to tagline, so to speak. Okay. And you don't have to mention any like specifics and things here. But like this, I've heard coaches talk about being mentally tough all the time. And then as a result, they try to bring in like SEAL training and stuff like this, and like doing up downs till you puke. Is that situation specific to what the guys are going to face in the field? And do you mind just kind of going into that and like what's your opinion kind of on that?
All right, so that's another mixed bag, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people have used the term mentally tough, right? Because they want that to define their players, right? You want to define your players as mentally tough, and you want them to be, right? And
Mm-hmm.
But once again, I think that mental toughness is it's partially maybe gained on our level in the weight room, with some of the strength and conditioning activities we do, maybe, we give guys these things that they think they could have never done before, and they achieve them. But most of that happens in our summer conditioning and like strength programming. And we do it in the winter time, like you've seen our stuff that we set up in the winter. I'm sure it's a little bit of madness. And so they experience these really hard competitive moments, right? And we put them in these competitive scenarios. I think that we do what we can and where we can do it, right? I think it's hard because when you're down 21-3, right? And it's the third quarter and, the clock's ticking down, and that those guys just, they feel like that ominous feeling, like they're going to catch that L, right? Like, I think that it's hard, right? Like it's, I think it comes down to like pure leadership,
Mm-hmm.
Like it really does, because at the end of the day, I'm not playing the game, and none of the other coaches are playing the game. I can't tell you, to go crush this dude on the line, or, put the running back on his back, like, because I'm not feeling that dude hit me. I'm not where you're at. So like, to me, that's like white noise almost, right? Like, and I mean, different motivation works for different people. Now, bringing in SEALs and stuff like that, I think that that's good to a point, right? Man, the Navy SEALs are really cashing in right now, aren't they? SEALs have been cashing in for a minute.
Yep.
They're making some good money on their names as of recent, right? Like books and fitness equipment and, cool guy gear and SEAL mental toughness training. I good for them.
Hey, those guys earned it,
Yeah, sure. Speaking of pissing people off, anyway. No, but seriously though, I think it's good because it gives them some prerogative, right? Like it gives them a different perspective onto their life, and hey, like, what I thought was tough, isn't really tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once again, it goes back to being specific. Like we can take SEAL Team 6, throw them on a fucking football field, and watch them get pummeled for 4 quarters. Like cool. Like we could do that, and that's exactly what would happen. These dudes are unbelievably good at what they do, and what they do is war, right? What they do is combat, and like the mental toughness aspect of that is completely different, right, than what it is in football, right? Like completely different. And I think the perspective side of things is really important there, but I think that we can get lost in some of that. I love the fact that football is a team sport, and that football to me is like, hey, if everybody's not doing what they're supposed to do, we all fail. We all succeed or we all fail. It's not a game based on individual achievements. Yes, you have your superstars, right? Like we could pick anybody in football, like you could pick anyone from Russell Wilson and he just comes to mind because of last night, right? And he played last night. He's a superstar, right? And he's an amazing athlete, right? And at the end of the day, if the O-line doesn't block for Russell Wilson, he's screwed, right? It doesn't matter how amazing he is. If the O-line says, nah, come on through, he doesn't win football games, you know? And so they might not get the, you know, the stats, and they might not get the love and you know, and all the, you know, the respect that they maybe deserve, but, you know, it's a team sport. And so I think that the SEAL stuff talks about success on a team level. It gives them a different perspective of what success and failure looks like. But I think that there's some people get too caught up in that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's people who are really missing the boat there. You know what I mean? On what they're trying to achieve. And, you know, shoot, Rusty Witt, you know who Rusty Witt is? He's a strength coach down. I want to say he's at Troy now. And I think he's the head strength coach down at Troy now. And he's a good dude. He was a 7 Special Forces guy, right? And he was a strength coach. 9/11 happened, went in the military, did SF, got out, and now he's a strength coach again. He bounced around a couple of different locations in the past like 4 or 5 years. Real good guy, but he said a really good statement to me one time where he said, he's like, you know, we get so caught up in this mental toughness and all of this stuff. He's like, but, you know, we have to remember, like, we're here to build these kids up. In special forces and special operations, we tear people down. Like, the reason why we do that is because we're weeding people out. But we brought all these kids in on scholarship, you know, like we recruited them to come here, and we have to build them. It's more of a building process, and we can't get lost in like this like military mindset. There's no reason for an O lineman to do 100 up downs. Like that's 300 pounds of human being. You don't have 300-pound Rangers. You don't have 300-pound SEALs. You don't, like, that's not a thing. That's not a thing, right? Like, I'm 5'7", 185 pounds. And when I was in the military and I went through Ranger School, I started at 165 pounds and I finished at about 130 pounds, right? So it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like these massive human beings, right? Like we have to respect the parameters of what we do. Like, if we're strength and conditioning professionals and we're coaching professionals, we have to be professional and look at what our boundaries are and what we have to go ahead and make sure that we stay within those.
100%. And then, so do you think, just, you pretty much mentioned it then, but do you think we're kind of trashing athletes, which still happens at some programs and things like that? I think as a profession, coaches are getting around this now and starting to understand it. And I think sports performance staff are starting to inform head coaches that that's not necessarily the way to go. But do you think let's just use the head coach as an example here. The head coach maybe wants you to trash your athletes and beat them down like you talked about versus build them up because it makes them feel good and it makes them feel like, oh, it must be working if we're puking.
Yeah. I think we're moving away from that. That's good, right?
Yeah.
It's very good that we're moving away from that. And yeah, and I mean, that goes back to what I was just saying, right? Like, it's like combat, right? Let's look at football, right? So football's 4 quarters, right? The field is what, like 52 yards wide, right? It's 100 yards long from end zone to end zone, right? And that's our field of play. Okay. Combat, right? I mean, it could be in the Arctic, it could be in Afghanistan, in the Hindu Kush Mountains, it could be in, you know, the desert in freaking Iraq, it could be on hills, it can be in the forest in Ardennes, Germany, right? Like, it can be freaking anywhere. The firefight can last 5 minutes, right? Oh, guy popped a couple shots, hopped on a motorcycle and sped off, and we can't catch him, right? Or it can be 5 days. Like, you don't know, like, oh my God, like, we're in a large firefight with a large, unit across from us and we don't have support. So, like, there's all kinds of variables that exist in combat that don't exist in sports. And if we try to go ahead and do this like chaotic training that's just hey, like, hey, suffer so you can suffer, so you know what suffering feels like, right? Like then we're not building our guys, right? And I mean, all the science says that, right? All the science says like, hey man, if I just crush you on a regular basis, you're not getting stronger, you're not getting in better condition. I mean, what I'm trying to remember what it is. Ranger school, like I said, I graduated like 135 pounds. I'll show you a picture sometime. It's scary, right? Like I look like a skeleton, and it's like they say your body doesn't recover for like at least a year, and that it takes years off of your life, right? Like, and that's if you just do 62 days in Ranger school, which it's supposed to just be 62 days. I recycled like 3 times. I was there for like 6 months. I was there forever. But it's just like, it's just one of those things where it's like, we really need to look at what, as strength and conditioning professionals, we just need to remember to look at what our guys are doing. Like, hey, like what are the actual demands of our sport? You know, what are the bioenergetic demands of our sport? You know, the biomechanical demands of our sport.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make my athletes stronger, do it safely, and get them on the field and keep them on the field, right? Mm-hmm. Keep them. The big part, especially in season. But yeah, I mean, you got guys who just, they love to crush dudes. And I think that those guys are getting weeded out because lack of success inside programs that go out with just the idea, I'm just going to crush dudes.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is, like, trying to keep with that mental toughness theme, what do you think is kind of the equivalent of then what you've kind of seen in the military to like inoculate you to the environment of going to war versus inoculating yourself in the environment of going to play against an Ohio State?
You ready for this? It has nothing to do with us in the weight room.
Yep.
Practice.
Yep.
Practice.
I'm glad you said that.
How you get ready for a football game, man? You practice playing football. Mm-hmm. Right? You want to be a better tackler? Cool. Tackle at practice.
Yep.
You know, like, do you do like dumbass like Oklahoma drills over and over again? Probably not. That's probably not where we're going to get better. That's probably just going to get somebody hurt, right? Because in all honesty, that scenario isn't super realistic in a game anyways, right? Very rarely do we have 2 guys lined up 10 yards from each other running full speed straight at each other, right? So it's like practice the way you want the game to be played, right? And then your guys will play the game like that. You know, I think that our job is way easier than we make it sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying there's not complexities to what we do, because there certainly are. I just see a lot of people, and I see a lot of programming out there that's very like sport specific this and sport specific that. And it's like, just make your guy stronger, make him less susceptible to injury, right? And, you know, and let practice do the rest. Stop trying to make your lift session look like practice, like, because that doesn't make any sense. You're wasting time, and you're losing the opportunity to actually physically develop your athletes.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I love the fact that you said that. It's, let's get better at the technical, tactical when we're out there. The psychological, that's obviously a tough one. But I think, again, the more you prepare for the environment, the more your kind of freshmen become seniors and move through the different years in college, they're becoming more inoculated to those environments. They're getting used to playing in front of 50,000 plus fans every week, taking a field goal on the 40 in front of 50,000 fans. Ideally, they'll have experienced that before they have to do it potentially in a very important game. So can they do it against some kind of smaller Division I team in front of a big fan base and things like that? Because we all know that the practice environment is not the same as the like performance environment. So I think trying to bridge those gaps is very important. But I think you hit the nail on the head when you essentially said, look, we just need to practice, get better at the technical, tactical, and kind of the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah. And luckily for us this year, practice is very similar to game day scenarios, because I mean, we're about to go play Syracuse this week, and they don't allow any fans up there. Mm-hmm. So our practice can have as many people spectating just about as the game day will.
Uh-huh. Have you found that from a kind of game day experience? Is there an effect on performance? Do you think it benefits a Wake Forest or not a typically smaller Division I Power 5 school versus like an Ohio State, Penn State, where they're used to playing in front of hundreds of thousands of fans?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, so I talked to a friend at Louisville, right? And he said, the hard thing about coming to play you, our guys say, is that, your stadium's a lot quieter than ours, right? Like ours, like there's like a lack of juice inside and I'm like, good. I'm like, good. Like if your guys need like 60,000 people to scream in order to play good, and our guys don't, good. And the difference is our guys can go, like, we're used to playing on the road against Clemson and Florida State and Louisville and those other big schools. So we're used to playing in front of really loud people. And, like over the past 4 years, our crowd has definitely grown. Unfortunately for us this year, we don't get to really have one because I think our guys were starting to enjoy that. But yeah, I think it does help. I think it does help, some of the smaller schools, because it's a different feeling, I'm sure, at Penn State when you don't have that place packed out and making all the noise. And it's a different thing. It's easier for other teams to go into those places and play, because I remember having an earpiece in, like five years ago when I was working with NC State over at Clemson. And I remember not being able to hear anybody in the earpiece. And I just was like, yeah, that's how loud this is right now. It's like, I can't hear anything, like nothing. I get nothing. So, imagine being a quarterback and, and like, or, anybody, and trying to communicate with the other guys on the field. And it's, yeah, there's a huge advantage that those gigantic stadiums have when they're the home team. And so, yeah, I think it plays a little bit in our favor.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree there as well. Just kind of being used to almost, I'm not going to say like Wake Forest, definitely not a silent environment, but at the moment with no fans in the stadium, it is. And that's completely, it's a different world. It's a world apart from, like I say, an Ohio State, a Penn State, and things like that. Just kind of moving on then. So like you're a certified athletic trainer, you're a certified strength coach. How do you think having that kind of AT background helps you within kind of the realm of strength and conditioning, working with football players? Do you think it gives you a slightly different perspective?
I'd say yeah, but a part of me is like, not really. And the reason is because I think that as you get further into strength and conditioning, and I'm relatively young compared to some of the other people, like in terms of like how long I've been doing this, right? I think that you have to look at everything from a whole picture, right? If you want to be a good strength coach. So maybe my base of knowledge going in on the injury side of things was a little bit ahead of somebody else's who would have come in from a different background. Maybe my AMP is a little bit better, but all that being said, I think that anytime I talk to any great strength coaches, you analyze injury, and you analyze injury because you want to prevent injury. And so I don't know any good strength coaches out there that really haven't gone in depth looking at hamstring injuries and groin injuries and shoulder injuries and chest, and like, like the typical things that you see every day. Now I might have like a little bit more of like a base of knowledge about like weird injuries that, like that, like Haglin's deformity, and like, like stuff that like, I don't know, doesn't really play a big role in a lot of what we're doing. It does help me communicate with our sports medicine staff better, I think. It helps me get my foot in the door, I think, with sports medicine people a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I'm still asking them questions because I'm not the person who's doing the sports medicine work with them, right? Like I'm not treating our athletes, right? I'm not working in the treatment room, and I'm not, directly doing the rehabs and stuff like that. I do work with our long-term injury guys and our short-term injury guys. And so I do communicate with them a lot more. But I mean, there's a person like me on every single staff in the country, you know, whose job is more or less to head up what's going on with the injured athletes and to coordinate, you know, progressions in rehabbing with the athletic trainers, you know. And so luckily for me, I've been blessed to be around a lot of really good sports medicine people. And, you know, between being here and being at NC State, you know, and even back in Long Island University when I was working at Post, like that was, you know, I had good sports medicine people around. And so I think that having a sports medicine department that, you know, speaks with regularly and has a mutual respect with the strength and conditioning side of things is hard to find. And when you find it, I think you get good results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one thing that we do very well here at Wake is we have that kind of open relationship with the sports med, and it helps that we're like their building's essentially attached to ours, so that we can just jump back and forward between the two. And that's obviously lucky because that's not the same at a lot of schools. So it definitely helps bridge that gap, and essentially the collaboration and communication is a lot more efficient because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just my next question, funnily enough, was going to be if anyone wanted to kind of get in touch with you, where can they find you on social media? But are you even on social media?
All right. So I have an Instagram account that I rarely use. And my players make fun of me about it because they're like, yeah, you know, when Nick's re-downloaded his Instagram because he puts up like 6 pictures and then deletes it again. And then and I mainly just put up like personal photos and stuff like that. I download it this time of the year, Instagram, for Soaring Nexus Squattober, and that's purely the only reason why I do that. Twitter, I usually have downloaded this time of year so I can retweet out highlights from my guys because I like to just do that to support them in some way, shape, or form. I don't know why it seems like that's beneficial to them, but I don't even think I have anybody but my players following me on Twitter. So I have both of those things, though. They exist. I have a LinkedIn. Feel free to hit me up on that. And yeah. And I answer that. If you do type me a message, I will write you back.
And they can surely send you a message by like carrier pigeon just to get you, you know?
Yeah. Feel free, carrier pigeon.
Just hook you up. And then just finally, Nick, any books that you highly recommend? Anything that you've kind of read in the last? Surely you read something maybe over lockdown or something like that you think, all right, this is a good book. Like you guys need to get into this.
Okay. All right. Yeah, this is a great question. I love this because I'm an avid reader. So books that changed my life. All right, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Stephen Pressfield's Gates of Fire. All right. That's a book about the Battle of Thermopylae. It's a historical fiction. It's a great book. It's a great read. I usually have 2 to 3 copies in my office that I hand out. Shoot, I got one right here in my bag because I had to buy one because I just gave one out. So that's this book right here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah.
And that book kind of helped. You want to talk about stuff like, so like for me, I've always been infatuated with other people's like stories of like success and you know, like, and you know, like that, go back to mental toughness, you know, like what Spartans had to do to become, you know, Spartans, what they had to do to just exist in their own society, was really pushing themselves to the mental brink. And it was one of the things I constantly thought about, you know, like on long runs, because I know everybody runs with like their headphones in and like, you know, and music and stuff, but that wasn't always a thing, you know, like it wasn't always easy to do that. Right. So if you didn't have an iPod, which was like this big back in the day, like, you know, like with like the armband and the headphones, you just ran in silence and your mind would wander. Right. And so when I would do my long runs back in the day and when I would ruck march and when I was training for Ranger School and stuff like that, like this book was recommended recommended to me. It was required reading in Ranger Battalion, and I ate it up, and I freaking loved it. And I would constantly run myself back in my mind to like how easy everything I was doing was like compared to like what they had to go through. A great book on training. I did drop Verkhoshansky earlier, so I'll say Verkhoshansky Super Training. If you haven't read it, and you're an up and coming strength coach, you know, you can put, no offense to Cal Dietz or anybody, you can put all the more new literature like that down and pick that up and see where the base of information kind of was coming from, because what he was doing at his time was really changing a lot of how we understand everything that we're doing now. And it kind of really paved the way for a lot of stuff to grow on top of our industry.
Give yourself a bit of time when you're reading that as well, because it's not an easy read.
Yeah. Gosh, dude. Anytime you pick up anything from Eastern Europe, just get ready for a long read with lots of all scientific terms, you know, and you might have to give it like a once, a twice, a third, and a fourth time over just to actually kind of get it. But it'll make you better in the long run. And then just a good read for something, since we talked about mental toughness, man, there's so many I could say. But I did recently read The Coddling of the American Mind, right? And that was an interesting one. The Coddling of the American Mind talks a lot about how, you know, we live these great untruths nowadays, of, you know, people are fragile. So we treat people like they're fragile, and, you know, like we act like how you feel like really matters, but it doesn't, because there's like facts to the world. So it's like, it talks about fragility. It talks about forming opinions based on feelings rather than facts, and how that's the wrong way to go. And yeah, it really gives a lot of insight onto how to approach, especially this generation now. You know, and I think I needed that, because kind of have a little bit of like an old salty dog mentality, and I need to not kind of look at people the way I do, and kind of like mature my own perspective. And I think that helps.
So that one was the Coddling of the American Mind. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to look into that one myself.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I recommended that to a lot of different coaches recently, just because I think it does give us like these great untruths that, you know, we are by, and it kind of gives you ways to address them, you know, and teach kids like, no, that's not right. That's just how you feel right now. And it's, you know, like, just because that's how you feel doesn't mean that is what it is, you know, like like it's not a fact. And teaching kids to kind of draw those lines, and that they're not fragile, you know, and they're, you know, like what doesn't kill you, you know, doesn't make you weaker. You know, like there's a point where what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is actually wrong. But, you know, for the most part, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger is pretty right, you know. And I think that those are just like really good things to kind of like take into account. But
for sure, definitely. And I think that's a great point to kind of to wrap everything up on. I know you've got a few meetings to go to, so I will let you go. So Nick, thank you very much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. And I know the listeners will have a lot of notes to take from this episode as well. It's been great fun. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you a lot, Chris, man. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.